Well, good morning, good morning, awesome people. I want to say welcome to Long Beach, but I will not do that because, again, I want you to come join me in the village in Kisumu Karate. As you all know, I'm only here for a few more days and then we'll be back there. So, what I want to talk with you in the next 10 minutes about the experience of being a black man in America, especially village black men who come to America as adults. I've met quite a few people, especially men, who just count their losses and walk away from America. A lot of men that I know that had my experience growing up in the village struggle mightily in diaspora. So I'm going to explain you why that is, so that if you end up marrying one of like me, you understand why living here is such a struggle. Many people still wonder what's wrong with us. Why is living in the West very difficult for men who were raised in the village? So as we do that, I'm going to show you what my morning routine looks like with the babies in the morning. As I get them ready, get the day started. Thankfully, I am lucky there's the two of us, and we sort of partner back and forth between Minority and I. So this is not a me thing. I don't want you walking away from this video thinking this is all I do. No, I do some of it, and Minority does her part. So I'm lucky in that sense. But the men that I know are struggling, and many are simply just walking away. So come with me, watch this video, and let me explain to you why this is a problem. All right, friends. So before you go too far, make sure you subscribe. If you enjoy our content, I need you guys to get us to 100K in the next 1 month. And then secondly, if you need help with construction, moving to Africa, builders, architects, interior designers, I am connected with people who are very skilled.
Because I have a noodle.
My daughter is practicing our mother tongue. And so anyway, friends, so excuse me, if you need any support with moving back to Kenya, you need connections, my number is below, reach out. So as I was telling you folks, some of us who were born and raised in the village are really struggling, and I've met quite a few village folks who just woke up and bought one-way tickets and went back to Africa. So I'm going to show you why that is specifically for village guys. Also, most importantly, as a big caveat, every person is different. Please don't use this information to stereotype all village guys, because we are raised very differently. Even within the same village, from one family to the next, people are going to be different. So what I'm going to share is very limited to the people in my circle, not yours. So don't use this to overgeneralize and stereotype other African men. So that said, the village men in my circle that live in diaspora tend to be folks who have a very deep appreciation for life close to nature. And so for us, city lights are not things that we find interesting. We look at it, but we love living close to nature. And oftentimes, the majority of us are unafraid to get our hands dirty. If you find a man from the village, many of us will do whatever it takes. Whatever work that comes our way, we'll do it. That's very common amongst us. And almost all the men I know from the village are usually very family oriented, meaning we will do everything to set up a family and to keep it going. Very few village guys would simply walk away from their marriage. Very few of those. And then many of us tend to be a little bit on the conservative end, especially on matters religion and culture. Now, politics, we could be fairly progressive, but on religion and culture, we tend to be a little bit more conservative, and that can sometimes be a problem when it comes to how we engage with our kids and how we engage with our spouses. So again, wait until you listen to our kids talking about us, especially when they don't think we are listening. I'm often very surprised to hear what they say about us. So, and then the other thing you'll notice with the men who are raised in village like myself is that we tend to be a lot slower when it comes to adjusting to the West. Our sisters adjust maybe 10 times faster. And for whatever reason, we don't adjust as well as our sisters do. Now, that said, some of this uniqueness come with challenges. As I mentioned earlier, our sense of tradition around gender roles, for example, often puts us in trouble because some of us were raised in homes where the kitchen was a preserve of the women. And then when we show up to diaspora and then we realize, this is not how it's going to work here, it can be challenged. And these thoughts about gender roles sometimes even influence the way we engage with our kids. I know men who will treat their daughters as and sons very different. For example, my kids are 7 and 4. There is, for me, it does not matter. I will do anything with my kids, but I know people in my circle who, as a man, they probably won't even shower their female child who is still very young. And again, this is not to blame them. It's just that some people are raised in cultures where the lines are very firm. And so they tend to think of the different genders very differently. But again, this is not all of us. So some of us still struggle with those very defined roles to the point where even at home, we expect that it'll be the women who are pulling most of what happens at home when it comes to cleaning and cooking and all that stuff. So it's not unusual to run into stuff like that. However, like I said, this really depends on how a person was raised. I was raised in the village. For me, it does not matter. There's nothing that I can't do at home. In fact, the only thing I'm still learning is my daughter's hair. Everything else that my minority does, I do. And I've seen many of us do that. But I know people who struggle with those very defined roles. Now, another unique feature about those of us who are from the village, we have a very deep cultural connection to the village. And so no matter where we go, no matter how long we've gone, we always hold these very fond memories of the village and we want to come back. And so if you're single out there and you're potentially going to date a village guy, just so you know, at some point, even if he's not thinking about it now, at some point he might want to go back home. In fact, when I was getting ready to make the next step in life, I knew that whoever I was going to date would have to be a person who was open to moving back to Africa. So village guys almost never, even if they are stuck in diaspora, their soul, their minds, and their everything is still stuck at home. They might stick with you in the city for a while, but just so you know, it is almost impossible to get the village out of them. And that said, a lot of what you will notice too with the village men is that we tend to date what I would call maybe we apply organic methods to courtship and dating. Now, if we had a whole hour, I would explain all of that, but I'll just give you a couple examples. Sometimes when you're sitting in a big group on a table, you might see a village man looking at a woman across the table, and he comes and tells you, "No, I like that woman. Can you connect me with her?" Now, the average person would think, "Okay, if you like that woman, why don't you just go straight and talk to her?" It's like, no, go talk to her, connect me with her. Now, village men also sometimes can talk to a woman, and within 7 seconds, we will tell you we love you and we want to marry you. In the West, some women find that very strange. It's like, what do you mean you're already telling me I love you? You just met me. Apparently, women in the West, within certain traditions, it is expected that you connect. There's a whole procedure that you have to wait however long, and then sometimes magically something changes where now you feel like you love somebody. I honestly don't understand it yet, but from the village, you start with "I love you" within the first second, and "I want to marry you," and that is nothing really strange. Now, I also noticed that many of us struggle to think about the emotional connection when it comes to our women, because we are raised in worlds where emotional connection really is not a priority. So village men will do a lot. They will provide, they will work, they will do, but the emotional needs of our partners is rarely one of those things that we prioritize. So even the way we connect with women in the same way Adam connected with Eve, again, if you speak Swahili, I don't know how to translate this. Some of us will apply the mama nani geuka method, as opposed to being very smooth and just connecting with somebody first. So those are things that we struggle to learn, especially those of us who are dating women who have never lived in Africa. So these things can be problematic, especially, like I said, when you're dating somebody who has never lived with Africans, specifically Africans from the village. Now, that said, some of us find some things that are new in terms of how the women respond. For example, when you try to date a woman and they say no, as a village person, that is a very new experience, because in the village, I don't know that women, especially at the time we were being raised in the village, had that option of saying no. And so when you move to diaspora and you're trying to date somebody, they say no, you're thinking, what do you mean you're saying no? Because that is a very new experience. So all of these things I'm talking about, unfortunately, sometimes even spill into the workplace, where there's certain behaviors that are very normalized in the village, that when we come to diaspora, all of a sudden we find out that even things that feel very benign are taken very seriously and even considered sexual assault. And I know many, many African village guys in diaspora that have gotten into massive trouble. Like there's one guy, I think he's a nurse somewhere in the Midwest, who is probably going to be deported because of something that, the way they describe it, sounds very benign. But in the Western world, there are things that would be considered sexual harassment, sexual assault, when in the village, those things were very normalized. So these are struggles that we experience in diaspora. But the toughest part, let me give you a list of about 5 things that are really tough for us. Number 1 is the idea of splitting parenting roles. This can be very challenging for a village man who was raised amongst many girls. For example, if your man is like maybe a child number 6 out of 8 kids, and the first 5 siblings were women or were girls, those men struggle mightily when it comes to splitting parenting roles, because for the most part, we are used to being catered to. And so when we move to diaspora and then we realize parenting roles have to be split, it's often a very new experience for many of us. And if you have a spouse who does not understand that part, it can be really challenging. But also, if you're a woman married to an African man who does not realize they're now in a different cultural world, it's going to be pepe for the most part. So splitting parenting roles can be really challenging for those of us who are raised in traditional settings. Now, that said, one other thing that we struggle with when we come to diaspora is that nothing that we see matches the husbanding or the parenting roles we were raised with. Because I'm looking back to my grandparents, my grandfather, my father, my uncles, the men around us. At the time, and maybe even now, the men around us were the alpha and omega. And if you just say something, you'd see everybody falling flat and running around. Those were the kind of role models we knew. And often these men left day-to-day child rearing for women. In fact, I don't even remember ever playing around my dad after age 6 or so. I don't think we ever did that. We used to play with my father and all that when we were like 5 and below. But after that, everything around us was always around the women. And that was very normalized. So the role models we grew up around no longer exist. And so the role models we find here are very different than what we grew up with. And so what that means is that ultimately, for us village guys, we realize that you've moved to diaspora and you are no longer the king of the hill. All your life you've been told as a man you're supposed to be quote unquote the head of the family. Of course, that is tied to religion. And the head means you're being catered to, things getting done, your word is final, people are looking up to you. Then you come here and you realize sometimes circumstances are different. And to make it even tougher, many of us live with financially empowered women who are also very educated, very smart. And that can sometimes really mess with this idea of being the head of the family. In fact, the kind of head that they offer us here in America is mostly full of suffering. It's probably maybe even the middle. It's not even the head. So the idea of the head of the family as we see it here is very different than what we were raised with. So this really makes life very different. So ultimately, a lot of us feel like we have failed. And as a man, there is nothing as tough as feeling like a failure. You look around and you feel like a failure. And so when we travel home on occasion, like it's December, we go home for like 2 weeks, the biggest shocker is when you are reminded of everything else you have lost. So ultimately, many of us just pack and walk away. I've seen men do that. Well, I hope, folks, you've learned something, and I will see you in the next. Bye.